Hello everyone, this video is for those that still think we have justice in America, that the Department of Justice, the FBI, the Bureau of Prisons somehow represent truth and equity and in any way, shape represents a moral and ethical judicial system that we have in this country. These are only the ones that I know about. I'm sure there's a lot of ones that I don't even know about. But I just wanted to quickly cover each of the people in this photo. To the left is a young man by the name of Schaeffer Cox, was a Liberty speaker, charismatic, ran for Alaska House of Representatives in a three-way race, garnered over 35% of the vote, nearly won the election in his first attempt at politics, and then he was set up by government informants and provoked to violence many times, all of which he rejected. Ultimately, he tried to flee the government informants who were threatening his life with his family, left his home, left his successful business, was just simply trying to get out of the state. And they arrested him, attempted to put drop weapons in his hand and kill him during the arrest, but somebody walked up to the car and prevented that. He's now looking at the next. He was sentenced to 26 years in prison, and he's only spent 5.5 years in prison, so he still has 20 years to go. The story of Schaeffer Cox is deep and complicated, but that's a summary. To the right of Schaeffer Cox, we have a young man named Bryce Matthew Quellar, who got very popular on YouTube, put out a tremendous amount of truthful information regarding the corruption of our media, the corruption of the Obama administration, was hounded by the FBI, the counterterrorism team. Bryce Matthew Quellar is a young man. He did make a mistake of getting inebriated and yelling at a YouTube camera about his thoughts regarding traitors in government. And they threatened him with 20 years in prison. They also threatened to throw his brother in prison for the act of removing a YouTube video. Because his brother, he has deep loyalty to his brother, he took a plea deal of 1 to 4 years, and he'll be sentenced on November the 1st of this year. My wife and I plan to be in his courtroom to support him during that time in Nevada. The next man to the right of Bryce Matthew Quellar is a man by the name of Russell Landers. He was caught up in the Freeman, Montana standoff in 1996, I believe it was. He's looking at spending the rest of his life in prison. What are his crimes? Standing up for the Constitution, the Second Amendment, trying to tell our government they need to get back to its roots, constitutional roots. The man to the right of Russell Landers is Pete Santilli. What's Pete Santilli's crime? He's non-conforming press, yelled as loud as he could in a way that many found irritating about our Constitution and how we should respect the freedoms of the people in this country. And he's now sitting in a Nevada prison, I believe in Pahrump, if I'm pronouncing that right, Pahrump, Nevada. To the right of Pete Santilli, we have a young man who simply got stoned, was living a life of, a typical life of chasing women and chasing drugs, partying. But he did make the mistake of getting stoned. His friend dropped him off in front of a house. He walked up to the house thinking it was his own house. Walked inside the door. The door was left wide open. And lo and behold, it's the wrong house. Sean didn't threaten anybody with violence. He didn't threaten to kill anybody. He didn't have a weapon. My understanding is he left $400 of his own money on the table. And I need to get this confirmed, but I heard he was wearing flip-flops. So you don't go rob a house, leave $400 of your own money on the table wearing flip-flops. When the owner came out and confronted him and said, "Get the hell out of my house," what did Sean do? Sean left the house. He didn't try to beat him up, didn't try to take anything. He left the house. Now, he did grab a bottle of pills that he had on him, but I would ask yourself, this man made a mistake. Yes, he owns up to that mistake. But does he deserve to spend 20 years in prison for that mistake. 20 years in prison. That's what Sean is looking at. If you go down to the bottom left here, you'll see Elaine and Ed Brown. They kept asking, show me the law where I have to pay income tax and I'll gladly pay it. Nobody ever showed them the law. And they'll be over 103 years old each when they get out of prison. I believe they're in their mid-70s now. And they'll stay in prison until they're 103. On the top here, you see a man by the name of Paul Hansen. He's out of prison now, thank God. But what was his crime? Why did SWAT team come to his house, brand him a felony, point a gun at his head, extradite him from, was it Idaho? You guys will have to help me out. I forget where Paul lived. But they extradited him to Florida. I think he spent over a year in prison, and his crime was that he helped this man over here named Ken Hovind. Paul also advocates going back to common law, and that he believes our judicial system is a farce, and he says some things that are very upsetting to the current administration. This lady down here looks like she could be your grandmother. She is Miss Vernon. She's the wife of this man over here, Lonnie Vernon. What did Miss Karen Vernon do? They claim she was out to kill a judge in the middle of an IRS scandal. But I don't think she was out to kill anybody. I think she was set up, and I believe that government informants provoked her and entrapped her. She'll be in prison for a very, very long time. This man over here is very famous, very well known. Many of you know him as Ken Hovind. He spent 9 years in prison, and they tried to keep him in prison for the rest of his life because he mailed a letter to save his property, Dinosaur Adventureland in Pensacola, Florida. He's out of prison now, and who knows what the Lord has in store for the life of this man. He just recently got remarried. His original wife left him and divorced him. The man to the right of Ken Hovind is a man by the name of Lonnie Vernon. He's a truck driver. He cussed a lot. But let me ask you this, does cussing a lot and running your mouth, does that deserve that you'll spend the rest of your life in prison? He was a part of the militia of Schaeffer Cox, and he might have said some things that many feel were uncalled for, but nonetheless, you have to ask yourself, did he have intention to murder anybody? I don't believe he did have intention to murder anybody. I believe he was entrapped by federal government informants, and he was set up. The man to the right of Lonnie Vernon is a man by the name of Charles Dyer. Many of you may know him as July 4th Patriot. He was a Marine who had been to live combat in Iraq, I believe, on 2 different tours. And the only way that the government could get Charles Dyer's fellow Marines to turn against him is to brand him a pedophile and claim that he raped his own 6-year-old daughter. I don't believe that for a second. We need to pray for Charles Dyer. He was a Christian when he went into prison. I'm concerned that he's lost his faith. He'll be in prison for the next 30 years if the government has their way. And they've taken everything from Charles Dyer. If I had to name one particular man who's been through more than, say, most, I would say Charles Dyer has had a lot put on him. Going from a decorated Marine, constitutional, charismatic liberty speaker, respected by those in your community, to being branded an incestuous child rapist with no physical evidence whatsoever because you have a Jezebel wife who turned against you, and the penalty he's paying for marrying such a woman is he'll spend the rest of the next 30 years in prison. The man to the right of Charles Dyer is a man by the name of Mr. Schiff. I believe it's Erwin Schiff. He's Peter Schiff's dad. He spoke out against the unconstitutional IRS, wrote books about it. He died in prison. As he was dying, I think he had a request to see his son or be let out of prison for the last few weeks of his life because it was known that he was terminally ill, but that was not granted. My understanding is he died in prison. Peter Schiff is on the outside today, and for whatever it's worth, he's a respected economist, and he's constantly predicting the downfall of the U.S. dollar. and telling everyone to buy gold and silver. As I look at the pictures of these men and women who have followed their conscience and did what they thought was right, even though I may not agree with every single one of their actions, I may personally believe, well, I wouldn't have done it that way. I can't help but have an overwhelming sense of empathy that regardless of the fact that I may not agree with them in each of their actions, I don't believe that they deserve to be in prison for decades, some of them for the rest of their natural lives. I don't believe these men are my enemy. I don't believe they tried to do anything that's worthy of being in prison for 20 years. I believe that our judicial system, Department of Justice, FBI, Bureau of Prisons, CMU prisons, which is a secret CIA-ran torture prison, I believe that our system has gotten out of control. The dog has gotten off the leash, and we have allowed it to put honest men of integrity who are willing to stand up and fight behind bars. This is a real war with real consequences. There are those among us who I would consider our brothers in the Lord who are paying the price for this war. Isaiah 59:14 says, "And judgment is turned away backward, and justice standeth afar off. For truth is fallen in the street, and equity cannot enter." You say, what can we do? I don't want to just put my head in the sand. I don't want to just ignore these people. I want to try to do something with whatever life I have remaining. Well, I would say that the Bible tells us to be salt and light of the earth, to not hide your light under a bushel, to speak the truth and not be ashamed of truth. I would pray that you would pick up a pencil and paper and pick one of these men or women and write them a letter, write them an encouraging letter. If you don't do that, then pick up whatever cause you feel compelled to speak about or be active about. But just count the cost before you move forward, because it's very possible that you or I will also find ourselves in a prison cell at some point in time. It's a serious thing to take away a man's liberty. So when that time comes for each and every one of us, we'll have to make our own decision on how each of us will handle it.